Welcome to another edition of Scientists in Action from T-Rex to Turkey, brought to you by the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We at the museum would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land we are on right now is the traditional homeland of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and people. We also want to acknowledge that the state of Colorado includes the traditional and ancestral homelands of 48 Native American tribal nations who now reside in the American Southwest, the Great Plains, and the Rocky Mountain region. Thank you. And hello. Hello to all of you out there that are tuning in. Hello to our scientists, and hello to all the folks, Kim and Kate, working behind the scenes to make this happen. We are very excited to hear your questions, and some of you we will get to meet later on in the program. If you are a school that's going to be appearing on camera, for the time being, please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted, and we'll check in with you again when we get to the question and answer segment. And even if you're not appearing on camera, please throw your questions into the chat. The more questions, the merrier. We just want to hear what you're curious about. And without further ado, I'm going to send it over to our scientists. We've got Drs. Garth Spellman and Holger Peterman. Thank you for being here and joining us. So Dr. Garth, can you set the scene? Tell us about where we are, what we're looking at, who you are, and what is the cool science you're up to?
Absolutely. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Ace, for the introduction. Really appreciate it. We are at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and right now we are 63 feet below ground in our collections range, and this is in zoology right now. So the animals that you see around us, many of them were on display at one time or another in the history of the museum. But we also are surrounded by these beautiful white cases that house our scientific collections. And we have large collections in earth sciences, in zoology, and archaeology, anthropology across the museum. And we're in big halls like this that store all of our scientific specimens. And we have more than a football field space that house those collections. So you can see our hall goes way back there. So as Asa said, I'm Garth Spellman. I'm the curator of ornithology here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. For those of you who don't know what ornithology means, that means I am the curator of birds, our wonderful feathered creatures we have here at the museum. And so that's why I am here to talk about from T-Rex, how we get from dinosaurs to birds, to turkey. So our beautiful tyrannosaur right here, it looks like he's about ready to feast on turkey for Thanksgiving. And joining me today is my colleague, Peter, so from Earth Sciences.
Yeah, hi, I'm Holger Peterman. I'm a researcher here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science in paleontology, and I study how changing landscapes across vast periods of time affect the evolution of animals. And some of the animals I study are these dinosaurs behind me, and another group that I'm really interested in are snakes and lizards.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us today. Our research is focused on the evolution of biodiversity that we see on the planet, both in the past and current. I study modern birds, and so, of course, Holger studies those from the past. And so we want to start off by just asking you a quick question so we can jump in. So we've got a poll question that's going to come up. And we encourage you to, voice your opinion about this. What do you think, how big was the smallest dinosaur? So the size of a bee, the size of a chicken, or the size of a turkey? So go ahead, think about that, and provide your answer to that.
Raise your hand, chicken.
And once you enter your answers into the poll, we will be sure to show those results on the screen. All right, Kate, do we have those results coming in? Oh, it looks like the majority of you feel that the smallest dinosaur was the size of a chicken. Now, that is a very good guess. However, it is not quite right. the smallest dinosaur is actually the size of a bee. And that's because modern birds are, in fact, living dinosaurs. They're the only surviving group of dinosaurs that survived a mass extinction around 65 million years ago. And so the smallest hummingbird that lives on the planet is the size of a bee. It's called a bee hummingbird. And it is about 2 grams, and it is found on the island of Cuba. So this bird I'm holding in my hand right now, however, is a calliope hummingbird. And this is the smallest hummingbird we find in Colorado. And it's about 5 grams or 0.5 grams bigger than a bee hummingbird. And so today we are here to talk to you about how we know that birds are in fact living dinosaurs. And so we're going to talk to you and show you some of the features from dinosaur skeletons and other things that help us understand that birds and dinosaurs are directly related to one another. So, Holger?
Yeah, and we're going to start off with what I think is the most obvious feature that unites birds and dinosaurs. And for that, we have this big black fossil bone. That is from a large meat-eating dinosaur that would have lived in Colorado about 150 million years ago during the Jurassic. The dinosaur is called Allosaurus, and what you can see here is all of the dark stuff, that's the bone. And then inside you see that white crystalline material. That is infill that entered the bone after the dinosaur died and filled the hollow space. So the dinosaur bone is hollow in life. And that is something that it has in common with birds.
And so right here, I am holding that same bone, the tibia or the shin bone, your shin bone. And this one is from an Andean condor. So this, of course, is a living bird that you would find there today. And you can see just how hollow it is. So bird bones, size for size. So the same size bird bone to a mammal bone is going to weigh a fraction of the weight of that mammal bone. So they're very light and they are hollow, just like you see in their direct relatives from well over 100 million years ago.
Another feature that unites birds and dinosaurs is not as widely shared between all dinosaurs, but the direct lineage leading up to birds has it, and that is toothless beaks. So in this dinosaur, an oviraptor from Mongolia from the late Cretaceous has no teeth in their jaws, but it has a beak, very much like a parrot beak.
And so we can see that with a modern parrot. So this is a beautiful modern parrot that we have, very similar beak structures for them. Now, of course, modern birds have a diversity of forms for their bills, taken to the extreme in some birds like this toucan. So, and their bills are very, very large and very colorful and specialized, of course, for their diets. They're frugivorous, and they have these little tomial teeth that you see along the bill to help them eat fruits and other things. But you see a diversity of form in modern birds, whereas in many of the ancient dinosaurs, the bills are pretty similar to one another.
They are. Another feature that we can see in this specimen that is a shared feature with it and modern birds is this bone here. Kind of looks like a boomerang. We have the same bone. We have 2 of it right underneath our collar. That's why it's called the collarbone. In dinosaurs, at some stage on their way towards birds, those 2 bones fuse together and form a single unit, and that is called a furcula. Birds have that too.
And so, of course, modern birds share that bone. And some of you may have seen this bone before. If you have ever had turkey for Thanksgiving, oftentimes this bone is carved out of that turkey and dried and two parties, two people will tug at it and see whoever gets the larger one. Supposedly, the legend has it their wish comes true. And so they call it a wishbone as well. And that's what that furculum is. And on a bird, I'm holding it upside down right now. On a bird, it sits like it does on that oviraptor dinosaur, just at the top of their chest, bottom of their neck. And it acts kind of like a spring for powered flight. And so there's muscle attachment all around it, and it helps for flight. Now, birds have a diversity of form in their furcula. So this one right here, this more robust one, is from an Andean condor, a very large bird. And some birds actually have even more fusion, where the furcula that is fused is attached to their sternum. So your breastbone, if you were to pound on your chest.
An additional feature that dinosaurs and birds share is really hard to find in the fossil record. And I have one of these rare finds right here, and that's a feather. This is a dinosaur feather right here from right before the extinction of the non-bird dinosaur lineages. You can see that it's just looks like a modern down feather, kind of.
And so we know, so dinosaurs that have been found with feathers on their bodies, so we know they're directly related to birds, because birds are the only living group of vertebrates, of course, that have feathers. So you don't find that in any other group. And in evolution, oftentimes you don't have repeated evolution very often where you see similar characters appearing in different groups. So we know that birds and dinosaurs are related to one another. And so this is a beautiful resplendent quetzal that you can see. It's got a beautiful reddish pink belly. So, and these beautiful green iridescent feathers. And so by studying modern bird feather structure, we can actually learn a lot about these fossil feathers and what color they might have been and what form they might have taken on. And so we can study modern birds to learn about what dinosaur feathers might have looked at like in the past.
One feature that we can see in dinosaurs, but that I don't have an example on a bone right now, so I'm using a prop velociraptor model here, is you can see that this is not presented as a scaly animal. It's presented as an animal with a lot of feathers. And the feathers are especially striking down here on the lower arm, where it has kind of like a wing coming out. And those feathers here would have attached to the bone directly. Now, the bone is called the ulna. We have the same bone. It has our elbow and our funny bone on it. And you can see a presentation right now on the screen that has little protrusions, little knobs on that bone where the feathers would have attached.
And so modern birds have exactly the same thing, and it's a lot easier to see in this Andean condor ulna. And so you see each of those little bumps on the ulna. That is a spot where a wing feather actually is embedded and attaches to the bone. And that attachment allows for the creation of a very rigid wing structure. And so the feathers that actually attach to that bone are these feathers right here. These are called secondary flight feathers. And by being embedded in the bone, it allows for a very rigid structure. And that is what helps and aids in the construction of an airfoil. So as birds fly, those rigid feathers stuck in the bone, right, create the airfoil. If they weren't attached into that bone, these feathers would be really floppy and pretty loose. And so we don't think, of course, that the feathers in a velociraptor were there for flight, but because those feathers were embedded in the bone, it's a pre-adaptation to powered flight in modern birds.
Then we have one more feature or uniting character for you that is really hard to see in a single organism. So we need kind of indirect evidence to make those conclusions, and they relate to social behavior in dinosaurs. And what I have here are two blocks from the same rock unit, from the same layer. We call those a bone bed of a hadrosaur, a big duck-billed dinosaur. This one is called Edmontosaurus, also from the Cretaceous. And what we can see here is this bone right there is almost the size of my hand. It's part of the backbone, so what's running down, well, colloquially also called the spine. In this dinosaur is roughly the size of half of my hand, and here it's about half of my finger on this side. This is the same bone. That means there are two different sizes of animal living at the same time in the same environment, and they live together. They interacted with one another. They probably exhibited some herd behaviors, and then they died together and were accumulated in this one layer in this bone bed.
And so we know modern birds, of course, by watching them and observing them, they are extremely social organisms. They're very social animals. And oftentimes they are found in family groups, so across many generations, just like we are in humans. And so oftentimes social behavior is a preceding to intelligence and more intelligence in organisms. So birds are highly intelligent animals, and it's quite possible that this herding behavior and social behavior contributed to the intelligence of dinosaurs in the past. So with that, we've talked about a number of features that unite dinosaurs and let us know that birds are in fact the living ancestors or descendants of dinosaurs. And so we would love to hear your questions and take some questions from you right now.
Yeah, so again, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw those in the chat. One question that came to mind, Holger, you mentioned that it is very hard to find fossilized feathers. And so I'm curious, why is it so hard to find fossilized feathers?
It's a great question. Feathers are really hard to find because they're relatively soft tissues. Bones are really hard. It's really hard to break a bone, but it's really hard to just break apart a feather. And that makes it very likely that during all of that active sediment, dirt moving during the burial process of a fossil, that they break apart. They just get really shredded to pieces. And anything that is soft is usually not preserved in the record. Now, to preserve it, you need very little energy. Imagine a pond in the backyard, and you just have the dirt slowly falling down, and you get leaves to accumulate there, you get feathers to accumulate there, and other soft tissues and easy to destroy fossils.
Awesome. And we've got a lot of feather questions coming in. You know, the feather discussion is flying off. It's anyway. So one question was about how can we determine the color of feathers?
So that's an excellent question. So we are able to study live birds and the patterns of color that are formed. So this is, in fact, a wild turkey wing. And so we know that the dark portions of these wings, those dark portions are melanin. So a pigment that is placed in the feather as it grows. And the white part is the absence of that melanin or that pigmentation. Now, for the feathers that you see up here on the top part of the wing that kind of are shimmery, that shimmery iridescence, so that we can also study the microstructure of those feathers to understand how that iridescence is produced. And in this case, it's the feather structure itself, the keratin, which kind of like our fingernails are made out of. It bends the light, refracts the light when it goes through the surface of that protein. And then it causes those light, those photons that are bent to sort of go back at our eyes at different directions. And that causes that iridescence and that shimmering. And we know that from the structure of modern birds that we can actually study that feather microstructure in the fossils. So fossils have been found where you find actually melanocytes, the cells where melanin is deposited, that are laid in a particular way in the fossils. And by understanding and studying how they are found in that feather matrix, we can infer the color of those dinosaurs and what those feathers would have looked like. And so we know from studying fossil dinosaurs that some had patterns, like you see in this turkey wing. Also, some had melanin and pigments in their feathers that probably produced iridescence just by studying how those pigments and microstructures appear in the fossils.
Awesome. Truly amazing what they can discover on such a small scale like that. So we have one last question from the chat, and then we will move it over to our on-camera schools. But a question that came up is, Garth, why are you wearing gloves while Holger, you are not?
That is a very good question. So the specimens that I hold are from actual birds, and these are actual feathers. And every human being, no matter how much you wash your hands, you still have oils that are found on your skin. And if I were to touch this bird, the bird feather, right, with the oil on my fingers, it actually gets on the feathers. And the feathers can deteriorate over time due to exposure of that oil. So it's not to protect me from anything that might be on the bird. It's actually to protect the bird from me. What Holger is holding are fossils. So these are mineralized, right? And they're essentially stone. So
Pretty much. But when I need to protect a fossil from me, I just built a little foam home, as we call them, these styrofoam casings to put the fossil inside of. And that protects the fossil very directly from me just grabbing it. Because just like the modern feathers, these fossil feathers are often just impressions, and they are just as fragile, if not a little more fragile than modern feathers. So I'm not even getting close to them, even with gloves. But for the most part, I don't need to wear gloves because these bones are solid. They're rocks, and I have to drop them in order to break them. And if that happens, gloves wouldn't have helped either.
Awesome. So that's a great reminder of not just personal safety in science, but also the safety of the specimens you're working with. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get our St. John the Baptist School. If you will turn your camera on and your microphone, and we would love to hear what things you're wondering. All right, we can see you.
they need to unmute, I think.
Did you find? Okay. Okay. When did you?
Hi there, friend. What's your question?
How did you find out that birds descended from dinosaurs?
Oof.
So we've talked about some of those features, like the furculum, the wishbone, and the feathers. But to be totally honest, scientists did not think that birds and dinosaurs were directly related to one another when they first started discovering these terrible beasts. For a long time, they thought they were just a long extinct group of animals. But we do know that birds, so modern birds, actually predate the mass extinction that led to the demise of the very big dinosaurs. And we know that there are avian dinosaurs like Archaeopteryx and some of these other weird things like enantiiform birds that had characteristics that are shared between dinosaurs and birds. And so the fossil record shows us this progression towards modern birds.
And on my end of the field in paleontology, the first person to actually come up with the idea that birds and dinosaurs are related was Thomas Huxley, who is famous in the history of science as being Charles Darwin's bulldog, the first fervent defender of the theory of evolution. And he looked at dinosaur bones all over the world, and especially in England, where they then were found for the most part. And he looked at birds and he saw so much similarity that he thought, well, probably birds are dinosaurs. But then nobody really picked up on that idea and developed it further until the 1960s and 1970s. So not that long ago, when one of my academic grandfathers at a university out east, he revived that idea that birds and dinosaurs must be closely related because they show so much similarity in growth, in morphology, in metabolism, so how much their body actually works energetically, and all these other features. Plus, it just fits neatly in a succession story that the big ones go out and the little ones survive.
Awesome. Thank you for that question. Let's get another question from St. John the Baptist.
Hi, I'm Beckett. My question is, how did the underwater species die?
Sorry, my friend, your question kind of cut out on the second half. Can you repeat that one more time right into the microphone?
How did the underwater species die?
How did the underwater species die?
The underwater species of dinosaur, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes, all right.
Well, there are no underwater dinosaurs. There is some speculation, I'll use that word intentionally, that there's one very large-bodied dinosaur from the Cretaceous of Morocco called Spinosaurus, that was a water hunter. But that one went extinct way before all the other dinosaurs, non-bird dinosaurs, went extinct. And that was because at that time, an ocean was opening while the ocean at which coast that dinosaur was living, that ocean was closing. So in the grand scheme of Earth moving and shaking, the ecosystem that dinosaur lived in, that landscape just vanished, and with it, all the animals that lived in it. So, but there are no water dinosaurs.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that question. Let's get another one from our classroom at St. John the Baptist.
Hi, I'm Manuel, and my question is, do dinosaurs or birds' feet relate to dinosaurs?
Do birds' feet and dinosaurs' feet?
No. Do a bird's feet relate to a dinosaur's?
Birds' feet relate to a dinosaur. So you want to show him your foot there.
I have the cast of a foot, so a replica of the second biggest tyrannosaur species that ever lived right here. And it looks pretty much like a bird foot, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It has 3 toes, big claws, and all of this is just the foot. The foot goes 2 up here. That looks very much like a bird.
Yes. So the number of toes that are front facing on a bird in this Andean condor, it does have 3 that face forward and a single toe that is faced backwards. Now you can see in this tyrannosaur, well, if Holger could turn it around, it's kind of hard, it's heavy. But there is no back toe, so that is lost. But birds' feet and dinosaur feet would have been very, very similar. They all have those talons, those sharp claws at the end. So, and they also would have had scaly feet that you can see in this Andean condor. It might be covered in feathers, but its feet still retain those scaly feet. So yes, we can definitely see similarities there.
And we have a related question in the chat, which is, has anyone discovered a bird with less than 3 fingers? Though I think there's another word for fingers for birds, right?
So that's probably referring to the number of bones that they have in their wing. And so it refers to their digits. And yes, in birds all have 3 digits, so in their wing, and you can barely see them. I mean, they're tiny little bones, and they have flight feathers attached to them. Now, bird toes are actually quite different. Most birds do have those 3 front-facing toes, but there are different configurations depending on the species group. And so one that has a very unique toe structure is like this toucan. And toucans, it's kind of hard to see, but they have 2 front-facing toes and 2 back-facing toes. And so their toe orientation is very, very different than anything you see among dinosaurs and even among other birds. They have evolved a very unique toe and foot structure compared to other birds.
Awesome. Thank you for those questions. Let's get one more question from St. John the Baptist.
I'm Ara, and my question is, if the blood cells are made in the bone marrow and birds have hollow bones, how do they make the blood cells?
So that is a fabulous question. Birds do have hollow bones. And some of those hollow bones also have marrow on the inside. So you do see those blood cells, and especially white blood cells that are being made there. But birds actually have very different red blood cells from our own. So our red blood cells have no nucleus. So they have no center in it that contains all the DNA, mammal blood cells, but birds actually have nucleated red blood cells. And that is something that they have evolved and also is sort of in response to the structure of their skeleton and how they regenerate blood cells and red blood cells.
Awesome. Nice in-depth question and answer there. Well, St. John the Baptist School, thank you so much for those questions. Go ahead and turn your camera and microphone off, and we will now shift our attention to the Kiffin School. So friends over at Kiffin, if you would turn your camera and microphone on, we would love to hear what you're wondering.
Natalie, can you see right there, sweetheart?
There we go. We can hear you and we can see you. What's your question?
If dinosaurs had feathers, did aquatic animals that lived with the dinosaurs have them too? And if dinosaurs had feathers, why are they shown in lots of museums if as like they don't have feathers?
Let's address the water-based question first. I don't think, and that's personal opinion, that we will ever be able to tell whether any of the animals that lived at the same time as dinosaurs had any structures like feathers or hair and were in the water, just because of how much more difficult it is to preserve that type of evidence of tissue in salt water, especially. But only birds have feathers. There are no dinosaurs that lived in the water, so no animals would have had feathers during the time of the dinosaurs. Now, the second part of the question was, if dinosaurs had feathers. I forgot the second part of the question.
If dinosaurs had feathers, why are they shown in museums like as featherless?
Right. That's because we only really discovered feathered dinosaurs in real big numbers over the last 20 years. And a lot of those exhibits that you see at a natural history museum, they take 30, 40, 50 years to be replaced and updated, because these updates are very expensive, and especially when you're changing the visual appearance, the way the animals look like from one to another exhibit iteration, that's a lot of money that you need to invest. And often museums just also cannot afford to make that scale updates. So we'll see unfeathered dinosaurs for a long time into the future, I'm afraid.
Yeah, those changes will be coming, we promise. But and right now you see a lot of the fossils, of course, are actually presented as just the bones as well. That's what you see mainly here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
So it sounds like there's some hurdles for museums to get over in order to catch up with the science.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. What else are we wondering over at Kiffin?
I'm wondering, where did the dinosaurs live the most and in what climate?
I didn't quite catch that.
Where did dinosaurs live the most and in what climate?
Yeah.
That is an excellent question, and I'm actually doing research on that. I'm interested in where did the dinosaurs in the Jurassic 150 million years ago preferentially live? So where do I find the most different types of dinosaur at the same time? And there the research points towards they loved floodplains. So everywhere where a river would just come out of the mountains and start making those beautiful meanders, those beautiful back and forth turns, that's where the dinosaurs loved living, because every year you get a flood. The flood brings new nutrients into the surrounding area. You get more plants where you have big plants. You get big plant eaters, and where you get those, you get all of the meat eaters. So everyone who lived in that environment had everything they needed to live. And that's where we see the most diversity. Now, whether they were in the tropics or not, that's really hard to tell, because what used to be in the tropics has very poor, what we call preservation potential, which just means it is really unlikely to have a fossil remain from that area, because so much water comes to the ground, water breaks down bones, modern bones, and then you don't get a fossil at all. So we can't even say how that spread from the tropics to the poles would have looked like in dinosaur diversity.
And that's a great, it's a great question, because we are still trying to understand, so what across our globe sort of drives patterns of biodiversity, you know, the number of species co-occurring in an area and what generates new species in those areas. We, to this day, even with modern organisms, we try to explain those patterns. So for birds, for modern birds, avian diversity, of course, increases as you get towards the tropics. But the highest diversity on anywhere on the planet are actually tropical mountains. So you think about the Andes in South America, these mountains go from sea level all the way up to 26,000 feet in elevation. And so because you get so many different habitats along those mountain slopes stacked on top of each other, you know, every niche, every different layer of habitat has a different species, and they interacted. So species diversity in tropical mountains is hugely diverse, but we don't know whether or not those same patterns that we see today affected diversity in the past. We can suggest, we can hypothesize that it did, but we need to collect more fossils to really answer those questions about, are the same things we see today, did they affect diversity in the past as well?
Awesome. Thank you for that question. Really opening up a lot of other topics, really showing just how far we could explore just with what we're talking about today. Kiffin, you can go ahead and turn off your camera and microphone. Thank you for those questions again. And now we will turn our attention over to Bridges Elementary. I'm sure we'll have some overlapping questions with the chat and other schools, but we would love to hear what you were wondering over at Bridges.
Hi, my name is Savannah, and my question is, what are the constraints to be considered a dinosaur?
Well, I can tell you what the ancestral, so the starting condition had to be for an animal to be a dinosaur. You had to be walking on two legs, you had to eat meat, you had to have two big openings in your skull behind your ear and one in front, and you had to have three vertebrae connecting together in your pelvis. So where your legs connect to your body. That would have made a dinosaur. And once that is set out, then everything that meets those criteria is a dinosaur.
Awesome. Thank you for that question. What else are we wondering at Bridges?
You're muted, sorry. Can you repeat that?
So my name is Luke, and I'm wondering why most of the birds now can fly, but like most of the dinosaurs then couldn't.
That's pretty much one of our first observations today, right? Look at how much bone there is right here. This fossil bone weighs about 25 pounds, and that's just the front end of that shin bone. Now it's fossil, so it's heavier than it would have been in life, but even in life, all of these dinosaur bones and all of these dinosaurs, they are really heavy. So only when they get small and light and get the right musculature to develop, get those big chest muscles, then they can start flying. So that's why most dinosaurs don't fly.
And so with bird skeletons that we showed you before, they are extremely light. So those hollow bones, they don't weigh much at all, even with a little bit of marrow in there, because marrow is essentially just fat and fatty tissue. They don't weigh much at all, just a fraction of what a comparatively sized mammal bone would weigh. So they're very light. And birds, we see the birds all around us. So a great proportion of their weight is actually made up of feather, which is very, very light. So some birds, 35% of their body weight is feather. And those feathers are what, of course, are helping them fly, those wing feathers and tail feathers. Another characteristic of birds that we see that is very important for powered flight is the shape of their breastbone and their sternum. So ours, you can feel yours right now on your chest, is very, very flat. And many of the dinosaurs, their breastbone, their scapula was also very flat. And so you think about the size of a bone and the amount of area on a bone for muscle attachment is very important for the strength of those muscles. So birds have a breastbone that's structured very differently. They're rounded. And then they also, if I turn it to the side, they have this huge projection, the keel of their sternum that comes out. And all of this area is for muscle attachment. It's for the flight muscles. And in fact, birds have two flight muscles that attach to their breastbone. One is their pectoral muscle, which you can feel on you when you move your arms forward and back, you can feel a pectoral. But they have a different muscle that we don't have called the supracoracoideus as well. And both of those muscles that attach to the keel of the sternum, one, the supracoracoideus, when it flexes, causes their wings to move up. And the pectoral, when it flexes, causes their wing to move down. And so their strong powered flight is all driven from their chest. So they fly and they flap up and down from those muscles. And we don't see these keels on any dinosaurs. So from the past. So they probably, even if they had wings like, feathers like this dinosaur. So they probably weren't able to fly at all or very poorly.
All right. Thank you for that question from Bridges Elementary. And unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. We just had so many questions. There are even more in the chat, but we have gotten some awesome answers from our scientists. And at this point, Garth, Holger, what advice or words of wisdom do you have to share with our scholars?
So I just encourage you to get out. What inspired me to study biology was I love being in nature and observing the world around me. And birds are a wonderful way to observe nature because they're out when we are, they're diurnal, they're out during the day mostly. And so they're easy to observe and to ask questions about, what they're doing, why they look the way they do, and how they behave. And so I just think get out there in nature.
And I really only want to say that nature is beautiful, and therefore studying it is really just amazing.
All right. So once again, thank you to our scientists, Garth, Holger, and Emily, who joined us earlier. Thank you to Kim and Kate behind the scenes, making this all come together. And thank you once again to everyone that joined us today. We really appreciate the questions and curiosity that you shared with us. And even if we didn't answer those questions today, I hope you'll go out, research, and find the answers yourselves and do your own science. And then one day, maybe you will be in this position talking to other students about everything that you have learned. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll join us again in December. We have a program about the brain and how brains learn. So if you're into neuroscience and how does this thing inside our head control everything and help us learn, then tune in next month on December 6th. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.